So that was kind of our first major decision to nail down. A second one that came along then seemed to be a bit more complex, which was how to actually provide the heat into the house that we did need to put in.
Right.
And from that point, then we started looking at a few different choices. Being on a fairly large rural property, we did have the option to go with geothermal. And of course, the original house had an oil-based forced air furnace. Our plans initially called for doing a forced air system again in the addition. In the process, we basically completely reworked that and have decided to do radiant floor based with propane as the heat source. So just to talk a bit about that, the whole question over geothermal, there's a lot of information out there about geothermal right now, a lot of promotion, totally. a lot of grants even. They'll give you some good money to put in a geothermal system. So tell us a bit about that option, or about that option compared to natural gas or propane.
Well, the discussion we had before was about first fuel. And so we've got a thermal design that actually lowers the demand. So a ground source heat pump is a fairly expensive system to put in. And so if we practice first fuel, if we practice conservation, we're reducing the load so much so that our savings from the heat pump actually take a longer time to pay back. The other very important thing is about the selection of the fuel type, because heat pumps basically use electricity. And there's a common misconception that electricity does not contribute to the burning of fossil fuels. So electricity is actually a form of energy, it's not a source of energy, we have to make it. And so in the analysis that we went through, we actually found out that with the better building envelope, we could actually heat with propane for, I think it was a little bit less than the ground source heat pump. Mm-hmm. And the system that we chose, the capital cost of that system are an awful lot less than the ground source heat pump. Mm-hmm. So we're actually winning in both ways. And we've got to remember that whenever we're doing any of these comparisons, we should be thinking about the operating costs of the house. So again, the geothermal people will say that they're getting 4 times the energy output compared to the input. But we've got to remember that electricity is a very, very high quality energy source, and it does cost a lot more per unit of energy than natural gas or propane.
I know that part of our conversation as well was about the idea of taking that, instead of doing just one big geothermal system, looking at different fuel sources, so that when we started looking at adding solar into it, that reduced our heat load or our demand for the domestic hot water. The geothermal systems will give you a domestic hot water spin-off value, but we can get that from the sun.
Right, and for free.
Right, and so when we do that, we're lowering, it's going to take even longer to pay off that geothermal system.
That's right.
So in that analysis, when we looked at the building envelope and reduced the demand that it was giving, and then even looked back at the old part of the house and found some ways to reduce the heat loss in that structure, the geothermal was taking longer and longer to pay off.
Yeah, and again, in the right application, with a larger load, for example, a rural estate house, where the only choice really is a power line connection, geothermal works quite well, because you do have a big load, so you have an opportunity to actually get savings from that system. The other thing up here is there's a lot of prevailing wind, so we have natural ventilation. We don't really need the air conditioning, which is the other benefit the heat pump offers. And like you said, we're getting about 60% of our domestic hot water load from the sun. Yeah, so again, it's a very important point about not just using one fuel source. When we get into renewables, we can start to use the sun, which is ultimately the source of all energy on the planet, right? And the best part of sunlight is it's free. So far anyways, right? Yeah.
What amazed me in that whole process, though, was, and not to scare people off, but it was a real process to think through, to analyze the different option, And then when we get into this fuel switching, the idea of contributing solar into it,
Yeah.
the solar hot water, as well as looking at solar air options, it just becomes a bit more of a complex system. That just took a bit more thought process and thinking through.
So it is daunting. So let's sort of think about what you did. I mean, you started going to a lot of home shows, you started talking to a lot of people, and the real challenge is to actually sift out with all the claims about performance and the energy savings, is actually sort of synthesizing that to a point where you can get a system that you can use. And it is a fairly complicated thing to do your first time through. So if you were doing this again, you'd have a great opportunity to know those things that you could actually use in your choices.